Business meeting, not work session this evening. Thank you for coming out. It's always fun and fascinating to come to a school board meeting. Before we get started, we do have a quorum, and we will ask our fantastic friend, Mr. Mark North, to lead us in the pledge this evening. You have to come up front. Nice try. Thank you, Mark. And unfortunately, our student board members will not be with us this evening. We will have them for their final meeting at our June business meeting, so I hope you all will attend. We've got a special recognition plan for them. So we will go into announcements, and I will start with Dr. Brannon. No announcements? Miss Spearing.
Yes, thank you.
Hold on, let me get your mic on here.
Okay.
There you go.
All righty, let me get, all right. I'm giving notice tonight to bring a motion to the board on June 10th to limit the number of items that we put on the consent agenda. At our last meeting on May 13th, there were a total of 96 items, ranging 26 letters of the alphabet, 65 bids and contracts, and then another 5 for approval or request for legal settlement claims. We received the agenda on Thursday prior to the Tuesday meeting. And I would like for you to be thinking, what is a reasonable number? But I believe that 96 is excessive. When I ran for office 2 years ago, I promised my constituency accountability and transparency. I personally don't feel that we can be accountable with 96 items on a consent agenda. The organization Soul for Souls is coming to Metro Schools on May 28th to provide shoes for our kids for the summer. 50 schools and 19,000 students will be impacted by the generosity of our communities who generously donate new and used schools to this organization. I see that Dr. Gleason is here tonight from Aiken. Would you just raise your hand? I want to tip my hat to the students at Aiken Elementary under the direction of Rita Black, who produced the Disney film 101 Dalmatians. It was a superb production, and it gave children who don't always have an opportunity to shine academically an opportunity to excel and receive peer recognition. Thank you, Ms. Black and Dr. Gleason. Friday, May the 30th, is a half day and the last day of school for our kids, and I think it's been a really good year, and I know they're ready for the summer. And I want to say congratulations to all of our graduates this year, especially to our kids at Hunters Lane and Maplewood High School. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Shepard?
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate the 4 teachers in the McGevitt cluster who last Thursday received their awards for being Blue Ribbon Teacher of the Year. The teachers are Laura Binion and Jacob Campos from McGevitt High School, Denise Yergin from Pennington Elementary, and Kevin Lemons from Andrew Jackson. The reception last Thursday was a lovely event. It was held at the residence of Chancellor Zeppos from Vanderbilt University, and that night we learned that the Blue Ribbon Teacher of the Year Award was the brainchild of our own Dr. Register, so I want to thank him for recognizing our teachers in our district. Many of us have been on the graduation circuit for the last week. We've had several more scheduled for this coming week, including all the academies, the Opry Mills, Hickory Hollow, and Oak Cockrell, and I will be at those, so come and join me. The graduation circuit, in my personal opinion, is one of the best perks of serving on the Board of Education. Friday morning, this coming Friday morning, the Donaldson Hermitage Community Volunteers will be saying goodbye and have a great summer to the students at McGevitt High School. If you're an early bird and love getting up super early in the morning, come out and join me at 6:15 on the front side of McGevitt High School. It's a really fun event. And then this coming Friday will be the Pencil Foundation Bravo Luncheon, and I'll be attending at the request or at the invitation of Kathy Neville, and I want to thank her for the invitation for myself and my board colleagues to attend the luncheon. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kim, do you have any? Okay, thank you. Mr. Pinkston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Three things. First, congratulations to the seniors at Glencliff High School who held their college signing day earlier this month, and of course graduation on Sunday. Over the course of 1 year, Glencliff has more than doubled its number of college-going graduates. This fall, more than 100 seniors will be moving on to the University of Tennessee, my alma mater. TSU, Nashville State, more than a dozen other post-secondary institutions. Other graduates will be going straight into careers thanks to the academies of Business and Innovation, Environmental and Urban Planning, Medical Research, and Glencliff's renowned Culinary Arts program. The instructional program led by Principal Clint Wilson and his team is paying dividends. Their work is supported by a Gear Up grant from the U.S. Department of Education that's helping seniors achieve post-secondary goals through mentoring, tutoring, college visits, and financial aid counseling. I think now the challenge and opportunity we've got as a school system is how to scale this success, not just at Glencliff, but across the district. I'd like to suggest that the board this summer take a good hard look at how to make college-going culture a bigger priority for the school system. Our obligations don't stop at the diploma and the graduation stage. I think we can help every student find the right path to a career or college if we commit and make it a priority in our policies and the budget. Congrats again to the Glencliff class of 2014. You all are going to do great things in life. Speaking of policies, just a reminder, I'll be bringing at the June 3rd Governance Committee meeting a proposed rewrite of the Executive Expectations Policy, EE3, regarding treatment of parents, students, and citizens. I think we've got obligations as a board to improve the school system's responsiveness to voters and constituents. This particular policy hasn't been updated since 2003. After a decade, it's probably time to revisit it with a fresh set of eyes. I originally intended on bringing a board resolution, but upon reflection, it looks like we've got a policy that can be an effective vehicle for the same goal. And then finally, speaking of resolutions, I'm bringing notice of my intent to introduce at our June 10th business meeting a resolution or a complex motion that would establish a comprehensive board-led public engagement initiative. As elected officials, I think voters, parents, students, and taxpayers expect to hear from us and engage with us directly. Right now, our only mechanism for engaging as a board is public participation once a month for 3 minutes at a time for a voter or citizen. I don't think that's enough. In 2014, I think we've got opportunities to move public engagement outside the boardroom and bring a lot more people into the process to offer input about the future of MNPS. So I look forward to discussing on June 10th ways that we might collectively step up our game with public engagement. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes?
I want to echo Ms. Shepard and other colleagues and Mr. Pinkston as well. Congratulations of our graduating seniors. I attended my fourth graduation now of Hillsborough High School, and in 4 years, this is the smoothest one that I have seen to date. I'll also say during the Hillsborough High School graduation, the band played. That's the first time that's happened, at least in my 4 years serving on this board. And I was incredibly impressed with the band. Dr. Register outlined to me that the instruments were ours, that they were part of the Music Makes Us program from the mayor's office. And so I want to give a special shout out to all of those budding musicians and to the seniors who were graduating and hopefully heading on to college. It was an exceptional ceremony this weekend.
Perfect. Ms. Froh?
Well, I was honored last week to participate in two different high school graduations. The first was at Hillwood High School, which is out in my district, and our commencement speaker was Brian Williams of the NBC Nightly News. The students had made a special video recruiting him to come speak. We're very proud of the students that did that. And he flew in from an unexpected trip to Russia, where he had just interviewed Edward Snowden, and he told us a story about sitting in his hotel room in Russia and getting a knock on the door, and he opened the door, and there was a guy standing there, and he said, "Hi, my name is Ed." And he invited him in, and he had a folder on his bed that was a green folder, and for some reason Edward Snowden was interested in this folder. So it was his notes that he was preparing to speak at Hillwood's graduation. So he ended up talking to Ed Snowden about Hillwood High School in Russia. So he said, let me recap. He said, to review, 32 hours ago, I was sitting in a hotel room in Russia with the most wanted man in the world explaining Hillwood High School. So anyway, it was an honor. So far, go ahead.
Has somebody swept Hillwood bugs?
So far on the board, I have heard in less than 2 years, the First Lady speak at a graduation, and we had the President, now we've had Brian Williams, and I don't know really how we're going to top any of this. The Hillwood High School grads, I did want to share that they had 22 graduates who made a 25 or above on the ACT. And we're very proud of all the work they're doing there and of, their efforts to get Brian Williams here, because that was quite a coup. The other graduation that I was able to participate in was for Martin Luther King, and I was floored by the fact that 89 of their graduating class of about 150 scored a 31 or higher on the ACT, and I recounted that several times to make sure it was true. They also had one student, Shu Zhang, who scored a perfect SAT, so congratulations to those students and also to the staff who have clearly served them well. And my final announcement is that we'll be having a policy governance meeting next Tuesday, June the 3rd. At 5 p.m. here. We have a very long and exciting lineup, so I hope everybody can participate. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And I have just a few before we get started. First, thank you to School of Science and Math at Vanderbilt, Hume Fogg, NSA, Lead Academy, Virtual School, Antioch, Whites Creek, Pearlcone, Cane Ridge, and the academies of Hickory Hollow, Opry Mills, and Old Cockrell. All with the exception of one, I will have attended their graduations, and it was the best time of my life. So I'm in a race with Dr. Register. I think we're going to be neck and neck this year. I will have done 11 graduations, and it's, as Ms. Shepard said, this is the fun part of being on the Board of Education, getting to meet and greet with these fantastic students and their parents. Also, a huge shout out to Steve Ball. East Lit Magnet had a 100% grad rate this year. Now that's pretty awesome. So that's pretty awesome, and they've done a great job out there with those kids. The Friday, this coming Friday, actually, I think it's this Friday because I'm not sure where I am right now. Yeah, I think it's this Friday. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's this Friday. TEA Assembly will be presenting the Board of Education with the Friend of Education Award, and that is the Tennessee Education Association. So for the entire state of Tennessee, our Board of Education won that award, and I think that's pretty fantastic. If you recall, last year, we were presented with the Friends of Education Award by the MNEA. So I think we're doing an awesome job, and it speaks to what we're doing. So thank you all for your continued support and your fantastic dedication to this Board of Education. And there was something else that I know I'm going to forget. Oh, one more thing, I promise. Apollo Middle School is undergoing a renovation in their library, and they are in need of, the only item that is not really budgeted is conference room furniture. So if anyone has or knows anyone who can donate conference room furniture to Apollo Middle School, definitely reach out. They have set up a GoFundMe account. It is gofundme.com/pitches, PICHES -furniture-push. So if anyone can fund the office room furniture, definitely reach out to Apollo and get them some furniture. So that's the end of our announcements. And we will move directly into governance. Ms. Shepard.
I don't know if I can read this or not. Consent agenda is as follows. 1A, awarding of bids and contracts. 1, Management of America, Inc. Madam Chair, that concludes the consent agenda. I move that be accepted as read.
One moment, because I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to vote on this. Let's turn these mics on. I wouldn't want anybody to miss out on this powerful consent agenda. There's a motion on the table for approval. Is there a second?
I second it.
Any discussion? Great. All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Whoa. All right, we're going to go, Dr. Gentry?
Did we get the information, or did you get the information that you
Mr. Hayes?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I had the opportunity to send a lot of questions to Mr. Henson. Late last week, we had a phone call over the weekend. I appreciate, maybe it was Monday, Friday. I was by the pool, babysitting my son who was 5 and swimming. So trying to be articulate and also watch a child in the water. I took the opportunity to spend, I guess, in advance of writing the questions, a couple of hours just researching. And one of the points that we talked about in the last board meeting was we didn't know if there were a lot of consultants who actually provided this type of work. MGT certainly is not one of them. They've got one study that they haven't completed yet, but don't have a tremendous history in this in this space. There are a couple of people who actually have been doing this for quite some time. I sent Mr. Henson and again, this is not my job to be looking for these people, but just decided to research it. One is the Center for School Choice at Vanderbilt University. They do all sorts of studies and things, and they're local. But due to the nature of the request, I don't believe that staff took the opportunity to really look for people, to spend, and this was my Google question the last time. Did you research finding someone else to do this? The answer was no. There was no research whatsoever around finding a consultant who has spent a year, 2, 5, 10 years trying to provide these types of studies for boards of education. Another group was the Center for Reinventing Public Education. This is what they do. Unlike MGT, it's not what they do. I do believe that we need a third-party group to come in and assist us in understanding the costs of charter schools. And I use the word costs very liberally. The cost of not opening a school. To some of Ms. Kim's points in our last committee meeting, where 70% of the children in 3rd grade in her cluster cannot read. What's the cost of not doing something? So I can't vote for this group tonight. Having seen that they're not qualified to do this study, they have no track record in doing this, and I really fear that in 30 days, again, not having interviewed the group, within 30 days, we're not going to have a product that's what we really want. I don't know where the rest of you stand on hiring this contractor. Don't know if you've taken the time to research MGT. They did a great job with our facility analysis. Mr. Pinkston, for the last 6 months, has made a lot of comments to me, and I'm sure other board members, around strategic planning and taking time to have strategic, thoughtful planning in place. We should not be faced at the 11th hour with a consultant where there was no research done whatsoever to even hire this consultant for such an important topic as how we spend our dollars. So that's really all I have to say on this right now.
Okay, any other discussion? Mr. Pinkston.
I guess the first thing I would point out is this discussion does not fall within the purview of our much vaunted policy governance model. We directed management last November to do something. Now they're trying to do it. I'm actually fine with the board having detailed conversations about contracts or personnel or anything else, but let's not pretend on other days that we do policy governance, then turn around and get into the weeds on small contracts. However, that said, this is not rocket science. Bringing in a team of people to perform due diligence on costs, project ahead to what revenue might be available is not complex calculus. It's time consuming. It requires expertise, which this firm seems to have. If you accept the fact that we've been using their methodology for years to rate and prioritize capital improvements, this group appears to know a thing or two about predictive analytics. With all due respect, Mr. Hayes, the groups you mentioned have a specific point of view, which is a pro-charter point of view. They are funded by organizations that intend to advance as many charters as fast as possible. So I'm not sure that we're going to get a particularly unbiased analysis from those perspectives. I know that there's been, and I missed, with apologies for missing the last board meeting, but just to remind everyone, we passed in November a resolution that directed management to develop a fiscal capacity model so we can assess the school system's maximum annual fiscal capacity for absorbing new charters at a rate that is not in accordance with Tennessee Code Annotated, contrary to the best interest of the pupils, school district, or community. State law encourages us to consider fiscal impact when approving or denying charters. If we agree that there's a fiscal impact when we add new schools of any kind, which a majority of us believed in November, then the logical next step is to try to project what we can afford to do over the course of any given year. I would just remind everyone that right now, 1 year out, we're facing a $22 million hole in the 2015-16 operating budget due to the repeated use of one-time monies to fund recurring expenditures. If you assume that we're not going to get much more in the 2015-16 budget than we're likely to get in the upcoming budget, 2014-15, then we're in a position of actually having to make cuts a year from now and not entertain new expenditures, whether it's charters or anything else. So in an environment where we're being asked to make very real fiscal decisions before we know what our available resources will be, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for some predictive, actionable data. And that's the big issue is this. The annual charter school application cycle is completely disconnected from the annual budget cycle. We're going to be asked this summer to approve charter schools to open in fall 2015 when we won't even know until a year from now what we're likely to get in the upcoming budget. So that's kind of an absurd position to be kind of spending money before we know how much money we have. So, I think, we just, whoever is hired to do this, we need to make sure that the vendor hears from the board as a whole or individually as they're developing the model, get everybody's points of view. But bottom line is taxpayers, households make budget assumptions every day. That's the real world. I'm not sure why we're debating whether doing this is a good idea. We're not playing with monopoly money over here. And I would just remind everyone that we made a recurring revenue assumption last fall that turned out to be pretty close to what the mayor has recommended. So again, it's not rocket science. Limited resources, fiscal responsibility, balanced priorities. I'm voting yes.
Any other discussion? Question? Ms. Shepherd?
Okay, so one more time, state clearly what we expect this study from MGT to tell us.
So the resolution, to quote, the words that were approved in November were to, quote, develop a fiscal capacity model whereby the board can assess the school system's maximum annual fiscal capacity for absorbing new charter schools at a rate that is not in accordance with Tennessee Code Annotated 49-13-108B, contrary to the best interest of the pupils, school district, or community. That statute is the law that encourages us to consider fiscal impact. Now, what they do or how they determine that they want to get there is up to them, and I would encourage them, management, to encourage them to talk to the board, individual board members, but at a bare minimum, I think we ought to have a work product that says, number one, here are the revenue trends, conservatively using past growth as an indicator of future returns. Number two, here's the trend in per pupil funding for cash outlays for charter schools. Number three, here are the metrics on the growth in existing charter schools that's going to occur no matter what new schools we approve. There's thousands of seats that are going to come into existence, even if we do nothing else. And blend all that into a model that says, if you want to reserve 30% of available new revenue for charters, here's what that looks like. If you want to reserve 50% of new available revenue or more and hold that up against likely new revenue to tell us what we can afford. It's just making budget assumptions. They may not prove out exactly, but again, it's not, this isn't rocket science.
So we have narrow guidelines, narrow questions, narrow areas around which we want them to work to.
Well, so there's a proposal that they've made, which I've read. I don't have it at my fingertips, but my recollection after reading it is it's a pretty standard proposal. The proposal is what the vendor offers to do conceptually, and I review a lot of consulting agreements over the course of any given year. The details or the kind of the hard scope of work, which I think is what you're asking about, is typically something that's worked out on the front end of the engagement.
Thank you.
Okay, so now that begs a question. If the details are worked out on the front end, this seems to not have as much detail. It seemed to me, and maybe someone here can clarify, it seemed to me that it was pretty simplistic, for lack of a better word, on what the direction was. But I think that has a lot to do with what the board said in that resolution. I think, based on what you're saying, we didn't give a huge amount of direction to the district on what we needed. We gave a kind of an overall, here's the high level view, go out and find somebody, which is what they did based on what we requested. And so now I think it's down to, I'd presented, basically, this company, MGT, is based on what you said in your resolution. We sought a company who would do that. We've given you that information. Do you want to continue with this company, or do you want to move on to someone else? And, based on your information, Mr. Hayes, I'd be curious about whether or not we actually have someone who has done this type of work specifically for charters. Now, the type of work that we're talking about, maybe, maybe not. But in this district, we've only had charters in existence for about 3 years now, going into our 4th year. So specifically speaking.
9 years.
Well, no. I mean, the number, at the level that we've got them is basically what I'm saying. At the level that we have right now, we've got a lot more money that's invested in these programs. So are we looking for someone who has specific experience related to this? You know what I'm saying? This directly? We didn't give specific direction to Mr. Henson about what we wanted, and so he came back with what he believed we wanted. So again, I guess my question is, do we believe this company can do the job or not? And if we believe they can, then we vote yes. If we don't believe they can, we vote no. But the short window, it's a short window. What is the expectation? Do you expect answers back in 30 days, 60 days, 120 days? Or do you expect answers in, a longer amount of time? So I guess that's what
There's 20 working days.
20 working days. So
20 working days to have a completed study and models what the proposal is. I think that's very difficult for them to come to town.
hold on, let me turn your mic on.
For them to come to town, to interview us, to hear what all of us are interested in. It's a short window, right, if you look at 20 business days.
20 business days, but at the last meeting, if I remember correctly, we asked if you had any questions, and you clearly had questions that you sent to Mr. Henson, to send those questions, specific questions to Mr. Henson about what it is we were looking for. And so did you get all your questions answered?
Well, the primary question was, first of all, was there any research done whatsoever around the consultant?
Did you get that question?
There was no research done whatsoever to try to even find a consultant who has operated in this space before. And look, I went to Google. I spent 30 minutes. If you've got I'm not advocating for one contractor or another, but someone who's actually done this work before and completed a study.
The Center for Reinventing Public Education is a charter school advocacy group.
So look at somebody like Moody's Investor Services. They've been doing it for 20 years, rating cities on bond capacity.
Right. And we don't issue bonds.
That could be right there. There are other people out there. I'm encouraging, I mean, to your point around strategic thinking, priority, there was zero research done whatsoever to try to find a firm. And that's the primary problem that I have. This is such an important model for us to use. And really, look, I'm not going to be here. You guys will take the charter vote most likely, right? We haven't changed the date. The date's after I'm off the board. So I don't need to fight for it that hard. But I also want this to be a tool that's incredibly useful for those of you that are here. And I have no faith and confidence whatsoever that this will be, based on what I've heard, which was zero research was done to find this firm. They've not completed a single study in this space. That's it. They've done a lot of work around physical capacity for construction, which is easy. We're a department of metro government who can decide how much they want to allocate to us on any given year. Same thing for the state. It's encourage management to think, to do research, and come to us with a fully baked proposal. And that's not what I've seen today.
And again, I'll go back to, and I'll give you a chance as well, but I'll go back to, I think what we've been presented is what we asked for. We did not give specifics to Dr. Register or Mr. Henson or anyone else other than what's in that resolution. They presented based on what we asked for, and we had an opportunity after the last meeting to go back and say, okay, you gave us what we asked for, let's go a little bit deeper and give me a little bit more on this company. Now, bottom line is, if you don't feel like you've received that, then you vote no on this contract. If you feel like you've received it, then you vote yes. And before I go back to you, Mr. Pinkston, anyone else over here?
Yes.
Ms. Spearing.
Being in a district that we have a big impact from our charter schools, and there's a massive, as you've said, there's a cost. We know about that. It's interesting that people who have advocated for charter schools also do not want to see our district schools close. And when they realize both can't happen, then, now some of the people, and I'm thinking even of some elected officials that were very supportive of what I would consider to be a proliferation of charter schools, are now saying, wait a minute, if we're going to have to close our neighborhood schools, our district schools, let's rethink this. When I looked at the contract, there's like 8 specific items. Impact on operational facilities, including maintenance and utilities. What's the impact on teacher and support personnel? What's the impact on transportation and nutritional services? What's the impact on MNPS technology infrastructure? What's the administrative costs associated with establishing charter services that MNPS provides? And what about retirement for teachers, including pensions, insurance, and other obligations? We've got a teacher right now that's getting ready to retire from a charter school, and she doesn't believe that she's going to have any retirement benefits. So I think that this is a very smart thing for us to do, to be thinking that we can't just fly by the seat of our pants and hope that all of this works out when teachers start retiring. So that's my 2 cents.
Mr. Pinkston?
Yeah, a couple other things, just picking up on the issue of school closures, just to remind people about Dr. Register's innovative pre-K expansion. We are in the process closing 2 underperforming elementary schools and repurposing those assets for early childhood education. So some of that is happening, but and that's an under-recognized and underappreciated part of that strategy. So I'd just like to take every chance we get to remind people that we are funding, as Mayor Dean challenges to do, funding what works. So that. Number 2, I don't know much about MGT, other than they conducted the last performance audit of the school system, so they're clearly pretty familiar with the top to bottom particulars of America's 42nd largest school system. Again, they developed the methodology that we use to rate capital priorities and prioritize capital projects, so they know a thing or two about predictive analytics. But I just want to go back to what I said at the beginning. Look, if we want to get in the business of nickel and diming scopes of work for contracts and picking vendors, then let's also start writing job descriptions and making personnel selections and doing everything else. If we want to do that, I'm fine with that, but this is not policy governance. We directed management to do something. They're bringing us a proposed solution. The only reason this is even in front of us is because state law requires these contracts to go here. So let's not pretend we do policy governance and then turn around and start getting down into the weeds of their business, unless we want to go back and change the board policies. And I'm open to that conversation.
Any other discussion? Ms. Kim?
Yeah, so I don't even know where to start. So the first thought is just, okay, like mentally, spiritually, like my head is just going straight to like, what are we here for, right? Is to ensure that kids get the kind of education that puts them on a totally different track in life. And when we say different track, we mean they have the choice when they graduate from high school to go to college, get a job, just choices, just like we have choices and did have choices when we exited high school. And I think, so that's my starting place, is like, okay, we're here for our kids. We need to do everything we possibly can to set them on that path. And that is not universally true right now in the district. And I'm not here to sit here and say, oh, well, blame this, blame, that's not, it's just a fact. Like, we know this. And so the question then becomes for me, then when we talk about like investment and we talk about doing what's right by our kids, it seems to me that what we should be doing then is figuring out what in fact does work, scaling those up aggressively, and then trying to wind down things that frankly just have been proven over time not to work. And we don't need to sit here and throw blame around. We don't need to get in that kind of a game. No, it's just like let's just figure out like what is in fact working, and then what in fact is just, despite our best effort, despite the good work of lots of good people, it's just not moving the needle. Like, let's repurpose that energy of those people and the programs to like to what actually works. So this is like my bias, right? Is like to think this way. Is like, okay, starting with kids first, what can we do to put them on a totally different track in life? What are the things that are in fact doing that? And what are the things that in fact are not? And so I guess when we talk about then specifically charters, and I hate to even talk about it, we spent a lot of time talking about charters, but since this is all about charters, I'm gonna talk about charters for a second, which is that right now, disproportionate to their representation within the district, they are way overrepresented in our excelling category of our academic performance framework, as well as our achieving. And so I guess it's not That doesn't mean they're all good. In fact, we're about to close 2, which I think is awesome because you know what? Like, we're looking for a return on that investment. And so now we've gotten those off the books. Masterfully done, by the way, with little fanfare and drama, unlike last year when we had to close the school. And so now what we have are a bunch of good performers, good to extremely good performers. And so I guess, like, this is what's rubbing me funny about the whole conversation. It's not intuitive to me then when we have something, again, not perfect, but something is clearly going right in that sector. Like, it feels like mental, like cognitive dissonance than to be talking about how to box them into a little bitty box and say, we can only allocate this much money to that. And however that is just what they're gonna have to deal with. As opposed to looking at the whole frame, you know, of what we're investing across like $1 billion, when you take more than $1 billion when you take in the operating budget plus capital expenditures, and saying, like, what within that whole portfolio is not giving us the return that we want. And when I say return, I'm talking about opportunities for our kids. And so that's what's just, yeah, which I know is like, I just got to say that, and I feel like we got to wrestle with that, like that reality. And, you know, like the scores are out, and I know some of us, like, we're getting like little tidbits and pieces of quick scores, and all that stuff is embargo, but I already know, like, based on what I'm hearing in terms of early returns, that if anything, this sector is only getting stronger. And so the first question that comes to mind is not like narrow questions of like, how much money should we allocate, and then like they have to operate within that box. It's actually, should we be begging them to expand even more the proven providers? You know, that because they're clearly, they've figured it out, and can we actually learn from them and spread that to the other schools, whether magnet or traditional schools? So it doesn't have to be all charter schools, but like, what are their practices? Can we spread those? But to the degree, though, that they are doing something right, then the intuitive question to me would be say, well, Randy Dow at KIPP, well, what are you doing exactly? Like, how on earth did you get those scores? Which are, by the way, like outpacing even what you were able to accomplish last year, which put you on the excelling category. For kids who, in my district right now, are just some of, yes, our most vulnerable kids. And so that's what I feel like the real question is here. And that's why, aside from the, like, yes, points of, like, you're right, we're not dealing with play money here. Like, in fact, it's very real money and very real investment. And yes, but even beyond the money, like, kids are right, like, squarely in the center of all this. And so that's why it's hard for me to even orient around this whole conversation, because it's like such a narrowly drawn focus on one sliver of the overall budget that, by the way, again, thanks to the Office of Innovation and thanks to like really good work of this board in terms of authorizing the schools, is doing really good work for us. So anyway, that's.
Yeah. And again, and Dr. Gentry, I'll give you a second. Again, it goes back to whether you believe this is a good idea or not. I mean, we are ends, period. Bottom line, this board is operating off of ends. So we need to decide, and this is, in my opinion, we've spent way too much time talking about this. You either are or not for this contract. So Dr. Gentry?
But the amazing thing about this discussion is it's raised some points. So whether it ends up being MGT, ABC, or XYZ, the bottom line, and I think I said this earlier to Ms. Kim, that we have to have something. The question that just pops in my mind is, how are we managing growth today, charter schools aside? So what is our model? How do we determine whether flipping a school to pre-K and the change in resources that are needed to do that, do we have the fiscal capacity to sustain that? So I agree, it's not, and that's why what the comment I made last board meeting is, this is a fiscal capacity model. Has nothing to do with charter schools. We're just going to use it to assess the impact of bringing on more charter schools. I don't get the connection between what it is the question we're trying to ask, and I don't get the connection between the tool and it's being a charter school. It's just a way to measure and monitor our growth within this district. But we should have something, or we should be asking these questions whenever we do something, when we change the calendar. What is the fiscal impact of doing that? When we, do buyouts, what's the fiscal, we can answer those questions with everything else. We should be able today, in-house, be able to answer that question. That being aside, I do want to say that, Ms. Kim is right about a lot of that, but I will kind of not walk the same road with you on that this is a move to box charter schools in and limit the number. I think it's really a question, that's the first question that needs to get answered, is what's our ability to continue to expand that. Whether they're doing great things, obviously we want to expand it. But again, it's always, we get a bead on one thing and forget the bigger thing. And you mentioned all of those things. The opportunity to leverage some of the practices that are going on in successful schools, be they charter or traditional schools. How do we expand that? For, I guess, almost 6 years now, I've been asking the question, have we really categorized all the programs and initiatives we've had? And can we tie them directly to some success, academic success? Everything that we're doing, everything that we're funding, every program, how can you tell me, can we measure the impact that it's having on academic success? And, I know we boiled them down to a much smaller number than they were 6 years ago, but I don't know that we have something that can tie us to the academic success or the impact to academic success of all the initiatives that we have going. I think the challenge we have is that even though we can say that taking, for example, charter schools and expanding the number of them and providing more of those types of seats for that smaller classroom experience and that non-traditional approach to education to help children like the ones that are in your district, that still leaves us with 80,000+ students to have to support. And so I think that we can't continue to have the conversation that just says there are charter schools that are doing great things, so we should be able to have as many of them as we want, without understanding at what point in time, and it may not happen today, going to your 5%, comment, it may not be there today, but at some point in time, we have to know when that tipping point is. And it may not be this year, it may not be next year, but at some point in time, we need to be able to say and understand what it means. And it may not mean anything. When we get the model, the people may come back and say, these new 5 that you're going to approve won't bother you one bit. But I think it's just to answer the question. It's not to come back and say definitively no more or only 2 more. But it's to answer the question, because it's only a component of it, right? So the fiscal capacity is only a component of providing a maximum number of high-quality seats. That's it. And so I think it's a piece of data that gets put into the equation that says how many more high-performing seats provided by non-traditional vendors can I afford? So I think it's bigger than this. And I hope, and maybe I may make an assumption, but I hope that's not our intention with this study, to definitely come back and use it as a tool to say no, but use it as an input tool to say, how do we manage the growth of all of our initiatives, not just charter schools? Can I afford to now create a program that replicates those best practices? So I think I would like to say that we're treating it as a piece of data and not as a single decision-making tool for that kind of thing.
Mr. Pinkston? I'm sorry, were you done, Dr. Gentry? I suppose so. Well, you're done now. Mr. Pinkston.
Yeah, so going back to Ms. Kim's point, if what we really want to do is isolate and scale what appears to be working in these schools, then I would argue that that's an organizational issue, not necessarily an additional resource issue, meaning no, let's not open more schools. Let's figure out how to walk across what's working here to there. And I think one of the problems that we've got is these things happen in silos in the school system. Dr. Coverstone is essentially running a separate school system of charter schools over here, while the rest of these schools are over there, and nobody's really talking to each other, or if they are, we're not seeing it as a board. So maybe I'm wrong. We can argue about that later. But I will say, I think basic math tells us that we cannot add new schools of any type at an unabated rate without having a destabilizing effect on the budget and existing schools. We don't have taxing authority. To continue to approve new schools with no regard to cost is a disservice to the council and our friends there who actually have to find the revenues to fund the school system. And I think there are limits to what government can do. And as Mayor Dean likes to remind us all the time, the MNPS budget has gone up $150 million during his time in office, which is true. But nearly 1/3 of that amount has been cash outlays to fund new charters or charters, new schools and growth in existing schools. So I would submit that continuing to approve unabated growth of new schools of any type without regard to budget implications is what will trigger the next property tax increase in this town. So let's figure out how to work with the limited resources that we have to drive improvement instead of just approving everything that comes in front of us. We don't have that luxury.
This has been a very healthy discussion. Ms. Frog?
One more thing, I'm sorry. And I think Mr. Pinkston just sort of addressed some of this, but I'm listening to this, and all these points that we've been raising about the impact of charters on our district. This is an opportunity to have a third-party result that. We've come up with our own numbers, but this is a third party that is not in, any sort of education reform game or anti-education reform game. It's just sort of a company that, I think is fairly neutral in these issues. But I just remind everybody that what we found was that we have one group of schools right now that is absorbing a disproportionate amount of funding relative to the number of children that they serve. What we found was that charter schools, cash outlays for charter schools have increased by over 50% since 2008 versus only 4% for the rest of the district. I hope I have that right. Is that?
Although per pupil funding is
Hold on. Let her finish.
Yeah, I'm talking about but the growth of charter schools.
50% a year.
50%, over 50% a year since 2008 versus 4% for the rest of the district. Now, this other vendor may find differently, and that is, is worthy if it's worthwhile for us to have someone else look at it to see if they agree. But the charter schools right now are serving 5% of our students. They're absorbing all available new revenue. That's what we've been talking about in our budget meetings. So I think it's worthwhile to look at this to determine, whether it's not about focusing on charters, but we do have one group of schools that is impacting the rest of the system. So that's why I think it's important to talk about it. And I also feel I would be remiss if I did not say, when we talk about charter performance, I do think we have some excellent charter schools. I think we have some great charter leaders. But I think it is very unfair to compare charter schools to traditional schools, because I think when we look at the data, we're only looking at one piece of the data. And we've had this ongoing issue about attrition, which hopefully we will resolve with this Vanderbilt study. But, I mentioned this at our last meeting, I get ongoing reports about children not staying at charter schools. And so you can't really draw conclusions just from the test scores if you're not also looking at the student population served. And then even if we determine there's no issue whatsoever with attrition, and charter schools are not releasing kids, or the families are not leaving charter schools because they don't feel that they're a good fit for the school, by their nature, charter schools are choice schools, which are a little different than neighborhood schools that serve any child that walks in the door. So the questions we should be asking is, do we have these schools releasing kids? Are they serving the same numbers of English learners? Are they serving the same numbers of special needs kids? And are the special needs students they serving have the same disabilities of the same severity as other schools? Those kinds of things go into the analysis of how schools perform. And honestly, I don't really even like looking at it that way, because I don't think it should be competition. I think we should be collaborating and trying to help all these kids. But I just think I don't think we're looking at both sides of the data. We're looking at test scores, but we're not also looking at the impact of student population on test scores, which is always what I come back to.
Okay,
So.
and the really unfortunate thing here, and Ms. Kim, I'll get to you in a second. The really unfortunate thing here is when we start talking about anything related to the charters, it always creates this major debate. We need to be focused on this contract that we have spent the better part of an hour talking about. And Ms. Kim, I'm going to give you final comment, and then we're going to move this thing to a vote, because we do have other business that we need to get to. It's unfortunate, though. I wish in my heart that the conversation would go to students, and not so much where they're educated, but how well they're educated in those settings, regardless of where they are. I think that's the one thing that should be the main focus. If we're educating our children well, I don't care if it's in a charter or a magnet or a traditional public school. I don't care if it's out on the curb out in Bransford. If they are receiving a quality education and it shows, that's what we should be focusing on, not the differences between the buildings or the location. So, Ms. Kim, I'll give you the final piece of discussion, and then we'll move to vote.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I feel honored that I get the last comment. And I second what you just said. That is exactly my point, is it shouldn't matter, which is why, anyway. Which is why I'm trying to figure out why are we just only trying to assess the fiscal impact of one segment. But I feel the urge, I agree, what this is lofting up for me is a desire to have the debate. and to have facts in front of us. Because, and I just have to answer this, is like, okay, when we talk about populations of schools, let's have that. You know, like, what do we mean by that? That KIPP doesn't have special ed kids? Because 17% of their kids are special ed. So if we want to talk about, like, I would love to have the debate with facts, real facts, not just accusations about what's happening in the national realm or what's happening in other cities, but actually here in Nashville. And what we will find is that there's more similarity across schools than we think. So before we start throwing out, I think, claims that they're educating, quote, a different population or whatnot, I mean, if anything, there are higher percentages of kids from low-income backgrounds relative to the district average. Higher percentage, the 17% is higher than the 12% district average. And you're going to see that across a lot of these schools. So I just feel like we should at least throw out real facts here in terms of when we talk about the charter sector in Nashville. Not in New York, not anywhere else. And so that's one thought. The other thought, though, so yeah, I guess you said something earlier about in terms of, sorry, the earlier data point before.
The cash outlays growing by.
Yeah, so just again, because for the 3 people who might actually be watching this at home,
There are 4.
Because right this is a framing point. Just to be absolutely clear, like every single student, there's a specific amount of money that follows that child. It doesn't matter where they go. And so I just want to make sure that everyone is actually clear on this point, that whether they sit in a charter school or a magnet school or a traditional school, the funding follows that kid. And I think, like, in all this, like, debate, that gets lost. It sounds like, oh, we're growing 50%. We're growing, no. It's the same. And so the charter sector would not be growing if parents were not, in fact, choosing it. So that's all I'm saying. It's like, per pupil, it is the same funding. And so that doesn't mean, though, that there aren't, to Mr. Pinkston's point, like, we're going to have to then decide, right? Because if you're paying for that same seat in a traditional school and a charter school, you're right, there is a cost. And we have to grapple with that strategically, absolutely. So I'm not saying that that isn't real. But I just want to make sure, because I think a lot of people are confused on this fundamental point, that it sounds like we're saying that if you go to a charter school, you get more money. That's simply not true. It's the same. It's just they have more control over that budget, and, you know, they make different decisions about it.
The money follows the child, but the costs don't.
Right, and we will have, I promise you, because this discussion has been fantastic, we will set some time to have a full-blown discussion, because I think, based on the comments tonight, it's needed.
And I have facts.
It's needed. It's needed.
I'll bring my facts.
However, tonight, we are voting on this contract, and I'm going to call for the vote now. We have a motion and a second to approve the MGT of America Incorporated contract. And just so we are all clear, I'm going to do a roll call vote so that there is no issue about how we are all voting. And we're going to start with Ms. Frog. Yay or nay?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
No.
Mr. Pinkston?
Yes.
Ms. Shepherd?
Yes.
Ms. Kim?
No.
Ms. Spearing?
Yes.
Dr. Brannon?
Yes.
Dr. Gentry?
Yep.
Motion passes. Thank you for a lively discussion. And finally, Dr. Register, we come to your portion of the program where you are going to give your director's report.
Budget on number 2 right now.
Oh, sorry. See, you guys are... I'm going to go ahead and throw this over to you, Mr. Pinkston. Yeah,
Madam Chair.
so we're ready to go.
Madam Chair, I'm just going to kind of mush this up into a budget and finance report, which is what I would do later, and just say, a week ago, the Budget Committee met to consider a revised budget recommendation. Just to recap for those at home who haven't been following along at every step in this process, we met with Mayor Dean in April to present a $32.5 million increase for the school system in the 2014-15 operating year. The mayor subsequently came back with a very generous increase, not as much as we'd hoped, but generous nonetheless, of $27.5 million, which meant we had to go back, sharpen our pencils, go back to the drawing board, and find $5 million to squeeze out of our recommended request, or out of our proposed request. We will be going to the Metro Council on June 4th next week. We can talk about that again later in the meeting during Budget Committee report. But we thought that we needed to go ahead, go through the motion of revising our recommended request to make it conform with what the mayor has recommended. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Henson to step us through kind of the adjustments that have been made. I think we had in front of us, just to recap, a proposal last week which passed out of the Budget Committee contingent upon one final adjustment, which Mr. Henson is going to present to us tonight.
Yes, thank you. And included in your board agenda packet, you do have the revised budget document. And as Mr. Pinkston just indicated, last Tuesday, the Budget and Finance Committee met and approved a revised budget to meet the mayor's budget proposal. And there was a request to reflect the closure of Drexel Prep Charter School that was not reflected on the original reduction or revision because it had just occurred. And so we have since made that change where we are reflecting the closure of not only Boys Prep but also Drexel Prep. And we've also included a contingency line item in the charter school fund for final number of charter students and any variation in the per pupil rate that ultimately comes to us from the Department of Education. As we discussed in the committee meeting, we're not sure where these students from Boys Prep or Drexel Prep might go. They very well might go to another charter school. And so until we have a little more information, we're going to propose to leave the charter school fund, the separate fund as is, as far as the total dollar figure at around $50 million. And so, but we are reflecting the two schools that just recently closed, Boys Prep and Drexel Prep. And again, this does reflect a $5 million reduction from the board's original budget request that was approved on April 8th. And so we now have a budget before you that matches the mayor's proposal.
All right. So having said that, is there a motion for approval of the revised budget?
So moved.
Okay, it's been, motion has been made and properly second. Is there any discussion? All right. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Henson. All right, Dr. Register, you're on this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board and members of the audience, we're here to, the first item on the agenda is to present to you a recommendation for proposed zoning for the new school at Waverly Belmont. I'll ask Chris Weber to come up and Ryan Latimer also, who will be a part of the presentation. Let me say at the outset that we are not this is not on the agenda for a vote tonight. It's a presentation to you, and we'll recommend bringing this back for a formal vote at the next meeting of the board. I want to make some general introductory comments about the proposal that we're making, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris for a presentation. The goal for building a new Waverly Belmont school, which has been approved, is to relieve overcrowding and growth pressure in the Hillsborough cluster, particularly in two schools, Julia Green Elementary and Percy Priest Elementary. And the long-term solution that we've come to over the last couple of years really is to build a new elementary school or to create a new elementary school at the Waverly Belmont site, which is in the fastest growing part of the district. I'll say that Waverly Belmont is perfectly located to relieve now and in the future growth pressures in the Hillsborough cluster at the elementary level. I will also say very quickly that there's quite a challenge in creating a new zoning plan to relieve overcrowding in schools that are all considered good schools. One of the challenges that we face is creating or maintaining diversity. And of course, one challenge that we always face in zoning issues is that of moving children, of assigning children from one school to another. And generally, and particularly when you're talking about good schools, that's not something that's welcomed. Early on, we really identified three options for using the Waverly Belmont School, and I would like to talk about those very briefly. The first one was to create a magnet school at that site, a no-zone magnet school. We left that option pretty quickly, and the primary reason is that we did not feel like we could have sufficient control or count on adequate relief in the two elementary schools that need relief if we just opened a school that was a complete choice school with no zone. The second option that we considered was to zone students to the new Waverly Belmont School, and I will put my term on it, an enlarged geographic zone, which could reasonably be expected to grow into filling that school from within the zone. There are some areas that if you look at the maps that reach beyond just the proximity of Waverly Belmont or 12 South, and they're labeled for purposes of your presentation 4N and 4L areas now. We received considerable pushback from parents in these areas. You've been forwarded electronically the feedback that we've received from a number of public meetings that have been held on this, and also from a large number of emails that have been received in the area. But our original recommendation was to go with an enlarged zone for students to be assigned to the new Waverly Belmont School. The third option is the one that we've settled on now, and that's to combine two fundamental methods for selecting or for assigning students in the school district, and that's to create a proximity zone with a choice option for other parents in the area, and this is basically the recommendation tonight. We considered concerns from, but let me very briefly define a proximity zone and what we mean by choice. A proximity zone is the neighborhood. It's the area immediately around a school. And in the case of Waverly Belmont, that's the 12 South area. That's the fastest growing area in Julia Green, and one where there's a great deal of interest in having a new neighborhood school. That proximity zone would not fill the school by itself. It would manage growth effectively as new people come in, but in addition to that, rather than having an enlarged zone that reaches beyond the community, is putting in a choice option for parents that would utilize Waverly Belmont, but also relieve overcrowding at Julia Green and at Percy Priest as we go forward. We considered concerns from the 4N area. There were a lot of parents who spoke in opposition to rezoning that area. It is, in fact, closer geographically and transportation-wise to Julia Green, and parents expressed a number of concerns about traffic and congestion in moving from that 4N area, which is west of Hillsborough Pike, frankly, into the neighborhood, into the Waverly Belmont. Traffic was a concern there. We also heard concerns from the area labeled 4L, which is the area south of Woodmont Boulevard, and those were basically community concerns from Oak Hill community and from those parents who wanted to remain at Percy Priest Elementary. So the modification that we've proposed is to establish a proximity zone, which is a reduced geographic zone, and to add choice in the two areas that we're recommending we leave at Julia Green and Percy Priest respectively, and that choice is called a geographic priority zone. And so let me frame this in terms of number of students. In the 4N area, there are 38 children. In the 4L area, there are 40 children. So we're talking about a total of 78 children that would remain assigned to Julia Green and Percy Priest respectively, but would have a geographic priority zone choice to Waverly Belmont Elementary School in the 4L area. In the 4N area, the geographic priority zone would be to Aiken Elementary School. And if you look at the geography and the streets, it's actually makes more sense. And we actually had some recommendation from parents in that area that if to consider Aiken as an alternative for assignment rather than Waverly Belmont. For me, a fundamental issue question arose when I made the decision to recommend a modification, and that is to answer one of two questions. Do we want to force change to what's going to be a great school and a great neighborhood? And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Or do we want to establish a neighborhood school with choice, where parents and students who can elect to go to the new Waverly Belmont School? The 4L area is much closer to Waverly Belmont than it is to Percy Priest. In fact, I live in that area. And my expectation is that 50% or more of the children who live in that area will choose the new Waverly Belmont School when they see what's housed there and what it looks like. From my house, it's a 5-minute drive to Waverly Belmont on a busy day, and it's a 25-minute drive to Percy Priest. Not much of a decision when you're making a choice between two really good schools. What does it take to create a great school? And I think we've lost this in the conversations that have been held and the debate over, is my child going to be moved? Is my neighborhood going to be moved? It basically takes three things. And if you consider any magnet school or any other great school, the three factors that really are important are, does it have a great leader? Are there teachers and faculty who want to be there? And the parents and students want to be there. And the answer to those three questions at Waverly Belmont, with the recommendation that we're making here, is the answer is yes. And so that's what it amounts to for me. I very strongly believe this is going to be a great school. And we're going to do a presentation on the numbers and let you see what that looks like. There is another important consideration in the recommendation that we're making, and that's a very positive change for Carter Lawrence Elementary School. Carter Lawrence Elementary School has a zone now, and we are recommending that Carter Lawrence become a no-zone magnet school. That will allow us to promote and increase diversity at Carter Lawrence. It's a good school right now. It is a math and science magnet now. It has a zone. It will convert to a no-zone magnet, which is what it was before the 2009 plan. It has an automatic pathway into Rose Park Middle School math and science magnet, which 2 years ago was identified as the best middle school in the state by the Tennessee SCORE organization, and an automatic entry into Martin Luther King High School if students meet the academic criteria for that. That's a really good option for people in this area, and one that I would support. And then finally, the last provision is to convert Glendale, and this is the same recommendation in the original proposal and the modified proposal, to reduce the geographic priority zone from 100% to 80%, and to make available to countywide lottery 20% of the enrollment at Glendale. We've talked about this before, but we've never had the capacity to do that. We've always before needed every seat at Glendale to help reduce overcapacity at Julia Green and Percy Priest. And with the new school coming on board with 600 seats, we have the opportunity to create a place for other children at Glendale, and in fact, I'm quite interested in recruiting Spanish-speaking children to a Spanish immersion school. Our research shows that it's a very good move. So with that introduction, I want to ask Chris Weber to walk through the presentation for you, and then we'll be glad to entertain questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Register. Before I begin, I just want to recognize Ryan Latimer, who's here with me, who may help to answer questions along the way. Ryan works in our office and has been very instrumental in helping this plan, and especially over the last week, as my daughter was born last Tuesday and I've been out of the office in such an important time. Ryan has really stepped up to bat, so I most certainly appreciate all your help. So to get started, let me begin by saying that all of this information and content is published on the website. This PowerPoint has not yet been uploaded, but it will be uploaded tomorrow for any public constituents that want to see it. The packet of information that you were handed was emailed to you last week, was the formal presentation that was sent out last week. We just gave you a printed copy, and that proposal is posted on the website already. And so I just wanted to share that with you. And the email concerns the public feedback that we received. There was almost 300 emails and about 60 public comments written on cards throughout these meetings. So we compiled that into a PDF to share with you so that you could review that if you want to. A lot of that input has questions and comments combined in there. The questions we specifically answered as they came along. We didn't include all the answers. We just gave you the actual constituents' input. As the plan progressed, they moved away from questions because there was more clarity and moved more towards recommendations and concerns. So you'll recognize that as you look through the comments that you see. To get started, I'm going to begin just with a timeline, and then I'll share with you the overview of the cluster changes, and then I'll share with you the actual, I'll step through each change, and then I'll come through at the end with a summary of the proposal. So to begin with the timeline, we've had 3 different public input meetings. The first public input meeting was on April 17th when the plan was initially shared. That was hosted here in the boardroom. That public meeting included a combination of both a rezoning recommendation as well as the actual building plans, site plans, and construction questions related to Waverly Belmont. Following that meeting, it was apparent that there was a great deal of community input, so we scheduled 2 additional public meetings. One was hosted at Carter Lawrence, as you see, on May 6th, and we had a second meeting at Martin on May 7th. Both of those meetings were fairly heavily attended, especially the meeting at Martin was very heavily attended, and I know many of you board members were there, and we appreciate all the input. What you see listed on here is the meeting tonight where we're presenting to you our recommendations, but there's an additional date that many of you may not be aware of, and that's the date of June 5th. So all of the public input and concerns that you've received were all compiled and as far as preparing the recommendations for you to this point. Since that time, we've got an additional set of emails from prospective Waverly Belmont families, and so we've set an additional date. This date has not yet been formally marketed yet, but the date is June 5th, where a public meeting will be here in the boardroom to meet with future Waverly Belmont parents to talk directly with them about the concerns that have been raised. The June 10th date is 2 weeks from now, which is when we're asking for a formal vote by the school board on the recommendations. This is just an overview of the cluster. You can't quite see it, so this map here zooms in just a bit. We've got the large printouts here, but they kind of get in the way of the cameras and everything, so I'm going to go off the PowerPoint. But if after the meeting, if there's any parents or board members that want to look at maps, we have large printouts here. The first thing is just to orient everyone with the Hillsborough cluster and the nature of the plan that we're talking about. Let's see if my mouse shows up here. What you can see just when you look and think of orientation for the Hillsborough cluster, in the northwest corner, you've got the brown area, which is Sylvan Park's school zone, and adjacently to the east of that, south and east, is the blue area, which is Aiken Elementary. Both of these two schools feed into West End Middle School. Now, the growth concerns that Dr. Register mentioned, which is what's really the driving factor for opening Waverly Belmont, is at Percy Priest and Julia Green. So my mouse doesn't show up very well on the screen, but Julia Green is the orange area displayed on this map that starts in the south kind of west area and goes all the way up into 12 South and Edge Hill area. This map also then shows Percy Priest, which is the dark green, the whole southern portion that also extends further to the north, and Waverly Belmont is located, my cursor is now setting on it, with the Waverly Belmont site's roughly where my cursor is there, which is the area targeted for the rezoning. Both of those two schools feed into J.T. Moore, and there are two additional choice schools that we'll talk about tonight, Carter Lawrence, which is a very dark blue school zone to the very northeast part of the map. Carter Lawrence has a small school zone that fills about 40 to 45% of the population at Carter Lawrence currently, and it is a magnet school. The Glendale Spanish Immersion School is to the south and east portion of the cluster, and that is a school that's filled 100% by choice, but it does have a geographic priority zone which is outlaid in this dark blue area. So both Carter Lawrence and Glendale also feed into J.T. Moore along with Percy Priest and Julie Green. So that just kind of orients you with the cluster prior to actually getting into the recommended changes. What you see on this map is the first piece that we would recommend to reassign into Waverly Belmont, and that's the tan area shown as 4A. So 4A is basically Woodmont on the south. Again, this cursor doesn't work too well, but Woodmont is right along the south there for 4A, and it comes up north there with Hillsborough Road, and it goes, and then it follows the existing Juliet Green boundary all the way into 12 South and up to Edge Hill. You see 4N is the area labeled to the west of that, which goes all the way over to Lynbrook and south to Woodmont, and it borders the Aiken boundary on the north. In the original recommendation, 4N was recommended to be assigned to Waverly Belmont, and through public input, we've decided to leave 4N assigned to Julia Green. However, 4N continues to be displayed on the map because of the priority option that Dr. Register mentioned. To help relieve overcrowding at Julia Green, we've decided to allow 4N to have first priority into any available lottery seats at Aiken. So Aiken does not fill 100% by the school zone. There are seats coming that are filled through the lottery. So what we've decided to do is let those families have first priority or geographic priority for seats at Aiken, and that's where 4N is labeled on this map. You now see area 4C added just to the east of 4A, which is again another tan area. 4C is currently zoned to Percy Priest, and again it follows Woodmont Boulevard along the south, and then it continues north into 12 South. This area is recommended to be zoned from Percy Priest to Waverly Belmont. To the south of that, you see area 4L, which goes all the way down to Caldwell Lane and Glen Echo on this westernmost border. In the original, again, in this original rezoning plan, this 4L area was recommended to be reassigned to Waverly Belmont. And through public input, we've decided to allow 4L to remain zoned to Percy Priest, but to give those families first priority to seats available at Waverly Belmont. So those families will be given a choice to decide if they would like to enroll in Waverly Belmont or Percy Priest beginning in 2015 when Waverly Belmont opens. And just to reference, that was the 40 students Dr. Register referenced lives in 4L, and there's 38 students in 4N that respectively currently go to either Julia Green or Percy Priest in grades K through 4. Okay, area 9A is to the south and east of the Hillsborough cluster. One of the concerns when we looked at designing this rezoning plan was to try to promote diversity where it is feasible and to try to not to negatively impact diversity at any of the existing schools. And so with 9A, it's a relatively small population of about 25 elementary school students that currently go to Granbury. But 9A is a very richly diverse mix of students. It's about 30% of each racial ethnic subgroup, and so it's very diverse. By adding 9A to Percy Priest, that allows the racial, ethnic, and for the most part socioeconomic mix at Percy Priest to remain where it is currently. If those 25 students were not to be reassigned to Percy Priest, the white percentage of Percy Priest would increase, and so that's one of several reasons why we're recommending 9A be reassigned onto Percy Priest. In addition to that, while you might know that Percy Priest is overcrowded, so is Granbury Elementary School, and so is Oliver Middle School, which are the two middle schools where it's currently assigned. And when you look at the drive from Percy Priest, it's not a far drive from there, as well as the drive to J.T. Moore. It's not a significantly any difference of a distance really for either of those two schools, and it's been argued that it's much closer for the middle school, in fact. And so those are some of the reasons why we recommend rezoning of 9A. You now see to the north, you see 4B is added to the map, and 4B is the current Carter Lawrence school zone. So in this, the plan would be to reassign Carter Lawrence's school zone to Waverly Belmont. And so, as Dr. Register mentioned, Carter Lawrence would return to a no-zone magnet school that we hope will promote and increase diversity. Now, in the diversity estimates you've seen, we've not accounted for that marketing and that recruiting and those available seats to make that turn, but we expect for that to happen and for that to be a positive change for Carter Lawrence. Carter Lawrence was previously a no-zone magnet school prior to the 2009 rezoning, which added a zone to that school. However, in this plan, though, it's important to note that we do not want to take away any of the choices for Carter Lawrence families. So Carter Lawrence families that live in this area will, in fact, get more choices. So while they'll be reassigned to Waverly Belmont, we will offer them the choice to remain at Carter Lawrence through a zoned option. And there'll be a second zoned option to go to Julia Green to help promote diversity at Julia Green. And so these students in 4B that are currently zoned to Carter Lawrence will in fact have 3 excellent school choices that they could choose. And I could talk more about zoned options, but it kind of takes us down a long road there of technicalities. But there's many reasons why zoned options is a preferred choice mechanism to allow families to take advantage of choice, especially in an area that's highly mobile. Because through zoned options, families can take advantage of these choices regardless of what time of year they move in, regardless of what grade levels their children are in, and it also comes with transportation to these schools if necessary. The additional area you see added now is 4D. 4D is currently assigned to Aiken Elementary School, and in this recommendation, it would remain zoned to Aiken. However, we would offer this area an additional choice through zoned options to also go to Julia Green. So this, again, is helping the families that live in Edge Hill have more choices through zoned options. That also promotes diversity at Julia Green throughout this process. Now, Glendale, I mentioned Glendale in the intro when I was giving you the overview of the cluster. You now see Glendale highlighted there on the south, and the purple area is the Glendale Geographic Priority Zone, the current geographic priority zone. So just to explain how this works, for Glendale, anybody enrolled in Glendale has to apply to go to Glendale, and they're selected through the magnet lottery process. In that process, we take siblings first. And for Glendale, second, we choose people from the geographic priority zone. For the past couple of years, we've not been able to take anybody, or we've not really, in fact, been able to exhaust all of the available seats from the geographic priority zone for Glendale. So that's just the nature of how Glendale is made up. Glendale's priority zone goes all the way far north into Edge Hill, all the way up to 4B. So what you see next is the recommended plan for Glendale. The southern portion of the Glendale geographic priority zone remains the same. However, we've removed the choice to the furthest north area. And that's because we've supplemented that choice now with 2 other options. And so this choice to Glendale is no longer relevant. And unfortunately, there have not been many families over the year to take advantage of that choice to Glendale. And I think that could be because of the timing and the nature of how the application works there, where zoned options might in fact be a better mechanism for families in that area. Now, one of the concerns with Glendale, while Glendale is an outstandingly high-achieving school, one of the concerns we've got is how do we promote diversity with this geographic priority zone in place? So through this rezoning plan, what we're recommending is that we shift from 100% of the seats filled from the geographic priority zone to reserve 20% of the seats countywide so that over time, the makeup of the school will begin to become more diverse. And so that's what you see there listed is, and anybody currently in Glendale can remain, the sibling preference will remain in place. However, the seats that will be filled will be 80% from the priority zone instead of 100%, and then 20% of the seats countywide. Now, this just is a chart of all the changes. I don't have to walk you through this, but this is on the maps, and it's kind of technical to reference each geographic area and the specific choices available or the specific zoning impacts to each area. One important point that is noted on this chart that I don't believe I've mentioned yet is the grandfathering option. So consistent with previous rezoning plans, the administration recommends a grandfathering option for rising 3rd and 4th grade students at their current schools. So what that means is that anybody who's currently in 1st grade at a school would essentially be a rising 3rd grader in the future, or current 2nd graders would be rising 4th graders in the future. So when the school opens up in 2015-16, when Waverly Belmont opens up, if the child is rising into the 3rd or 4th grade at Julie Green or Percy Priest, they'll be offered the availability to remain at those schools through a grandfathering option. Now, in addition to that, sibling preference will apply. So if a family happened to have a rising 3rd or 4th grade child that qualified for grandfathering, and they just so happen to also have a kindergarten child, they could also keep the kindergarten child with the older sibling at Julie Green. This is just back to a whole overview of the Hillsborough cluster. It's not real legible on this, but we do have a larger printout if anyone needs to see it later. Some numbers for comparison. This is a little hard to see on the slide, but you did get a handout. So board members got a handout that looks like this. Before I get into the fine details of the rezoning numbers and diversity and counts and things for the current recommendation, we thought it might be helpful to share with you how the current proposal compares with the previous proposal that was shared publicly. So I'll walk you through this chart. To begin with, you see Julia Green listed at the top if everyone's following along. It's this individual handout that was given out if everybody has it. So you see Julia Green is listed at the top with a capacity of 495, and Julia Green's current enrollment is 580 students. In the original proposal, we were estimating that the rezoning would drop the enrollment to roughly 416 students, and that does not account for grandfathering, but down to 416 students. In this modified plan, you see that the number is increased by almost 40 students to 356 students due to the change at 4N that we've referenced. The diversity numbers listed there below, the farm percent at Julia Green is currently 15%. In the original recommendations, the free and reduced meal at Julia Green would go up to 16%, and in the modified, it drops now by 2%, so there's a very slight change there. With the white percentage of students, Julia Green is currently 77% white, And the original proposal had that estimate of going up by 3%, and that is not changed in the current proposal. That remains at 80%. The Black and the other racial ethnic subgroups listed there below are again roughly the same. They're not too much different than what their current demographic mix is at Julie Green, and the same is true at Percy Priest. And between the two proposals, they don't vary greatly between the two schools either. In fact, when you look at this proposal to kind of boil down the differences, it's just that there's roughly 30 to 40 student shift between the proposal at each one of these two schools. For Waverly Belmont, the school at the very bottom is listed there. The original proposal had 420 students. Now, it's important to note that that includes 60 pre-K students. So that would be an estimate enrollment in 2015 with 420 students. And the modified then again drops that by the 78 or 80 students that Dr. Register mentioned earlier. However, we do think that through the choice mechanism offered to 4L and also through the nature of Waverly Belmont being an outstanding school, the school will fill up. These figures are based strictly off of rezoning and known children to be reassigned at this point in time. You see that the free and reduced meal percentage from the original proposal has increased by roughly 10%. And that's one of the concerns that we've started to hear from Waverly Belmont families is the changing of diversity there. Now, for several reasons, we think that these diversity estimates, in fact, might be on the high side because these estimates did not account for any future families choosing Waverly Belmont that might have otherwise chose Glendale. So we think that there will be families in the future that will choose Waverly Belmont over Glendale, whether it be due to the 80-20 countywide split or whether it due to the proximity of where they live and the location of Waverly Belmont and it being an outstanding school. If that, as those families choose Waverly Belmont, that number will shift where the white percentage would likely increase and the socioeconomic might decrease some. We also expect these numbers to be a little bit on the high side because they don't account for the changing demographics. 12 South is Dr. Register mentioned, is one of the most rapid growing areas. And specifically, it's also becoming more and more diverse when you look at the population there. So as the population increases, we also expect those population increases to correlate with diversity changes that would likely decrease the socioeconomic percentage slightly at Waverly Belmont in the future. However, these numbers are based strictly off of reassigning students. The third factor is a reason why Waverly Belmont's enrollment will go up and the diversity would likely shift some is because when we open a new school, we always typically see an increase of population. When we opened Cane Ridge Elementary School in Antioch, we knew the numbers, but then just more people showed up. And that's a typical trend when we open new schools, whether they leave private, whether they just new families move in, whether it's just a changing of choices. It's really hard to really plan for, but we do see increased numbers there due to that. Now, these are the same enrollment and capacities that I've been through in these are listed in your handout in the formal proposal too. So I won't walk through all of these numbers in fine detail, but there are a couple important points, and I know for those in the crowd the numbers might be a little hard to see, so I'll read them. Just the important points here is that you see Julia Green and Percy Priest are currently about 115% over capacity. And those two schools are projected to grow to almost 150% of capacity. So that's really the driving factor for Waverly Belmont opening. What you see then listed below is how the enrollment drops at those two schools, albeit might be slightly, but closer to capacity. And the other thing that it does is it also takes out the primary growth area out of those two schools and shifts it into the new Waverly Belmont attendance boundary. And through the choice mechanisms, we think that the future choices of these families will trend towards Waverly Belmont. These are the diversity figures, which, again, I've mentioned many of these already, but for those that want to compare the details, they're in your proposal. This lists for each school in the cluster, it lists like, for example, Waverly Belmont is the first school listed. It has 2 rows associated with it. One is October 2013-14, and the row below that is the estimate for 2015-16. So these figures are the known students in grades K through 4 that are directly reassigned due to rezoning. And then it shows the racial ethnic mix of each of those students. So you see where the African American population at Waverly Belmont is estimated to be 49%. That's based just strictly on the number of students being reassigned at this point in time. And because Waverly Belmont's a new school, you obviously don't see any current enrollments listed. For Julia Green, you could look at Julia Green and see where Julia Green in 2013-14 had 13% African American, and that's projected to go down slightly to 11% African American. And at Percy Priest, for example, you could look at the white percentage there, where Percy Priest is currently 85% white, and it's expected to stay roughly the same. These are the same figures. This next slide is the same figures. However, it shows the free and reduced meal, the EL figures, as well as the disability figures. Through the district's diversity management plan, it's not focused only on race ethnic, it's focused on 4 different categories, and so this is looking at all 4 of those categories. Again, I've kind of already spoke to these figures. One thing that is apparent when you look at this is just that Waverly Belmont's expected, based on known students, is showing 48%. But one thing that stands out on this is Carter Lawrence, which is setting at 91% free and reduced meal. And it's only projected to go down by 3%. We expect to see a larger improvement in diversity. This doesn't plan for the additional students choosing choice. And it also shows when you look at the contrast between Carter Lawrence and Glendale, these are 2 schools that are on opposite ends of the spectrum that are needing the most help through diversity. So through this rezoning plan, we've tried to promote diversity where practical in this plan. Just an overview of the changes. It addresses overcrowding at Julia Green and Percy Priest. It also increases the availability of school choice, which is important in our district with the large amount of choice options available, and with our district using choice to help promote diversity. This plan is in line with that. The 3 bullets that I've already mentioned there is the zoned options to Julia Green, where those families won't be forced to attend any school, but they'll have 3 outstanding school choices to choose from. Carter Lawrence will return to a district-wide magnet school, and the GPZ for Aiken and the priority for Waverly Belmont as well. So the diversity improvements are expected at Carter Lawrence and Glendale, and I've already mentioned the grandfathering options as well. So that's actually the end of the presentation. So with that, we'll open it up for questions or comments.
And I have several, but I'll let my board members go first. Ms. Spearing?
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for this presentation. The plan is supposed to alleviate overcrowding and hopefully promote diversity. But as I look at it, okay, it's going to decrease enrollment, or at least bring it up to 100%, it looks like, instead of 112 to 147%. However, when we look at diversity, Percy Priest is, 85% white, and that will remain about the same. Julia Green, 77% white now, 80. It'll go more, it'll be more white. Glendale, 86%. Sylvan Park, 61%. And then Carter Lawrence is just the opposite. It's 78% black now, or African American, and it will be 75%. So I'm wondering, is there a way that we could implement these changes a little at a time with parental input and community input, so that it's not just we're going to do it this year because we have a new school opening, but we believe in plurality. We believe that our children that are disadvantaged, will perform and have better opportunities when they are with children who are higher performing or have higher socioeconomics. We believe that. And if we believe that, we must do a better job than these numbers. It's just, we don't want to have white schools and black schools. We've got to have better diversity. And I know it's hard to do because we've heard from parents and we understand. So is there a way to bring our parents in to explain this to them and move in a way that will bring more diversity to these wonderful schools at Julia Green, Percy Priest, Glendale?
Yes, thank you for the comments. I certainly agree with you, and I think we've shared this plan with Dr. Stevens, Lynn Stevens, our consultant, and with John Borkowski, our civil rights attorney, and with other people. And what we know is important is the recruitment efforts, and that's from the principals in the schools, but also with assistance from us. And I appreciate Mr. North being here tonight because he was involved in the big rezoning plan, and my approach to this will be zero default, just like it was when we implemented the pupil reassignment plan in 2010, to reach every parent, to reach to every child, because there really are good choices available for parents. Julia Green is a great choice. Carter Lawrence will be a good choice, and I think a lot of parents around there will choose that. Waverly Belmont, of course, is the zone for a number of these children, but also choices to other schools. So it depends on, rather than going in and splitting a neighborhood that's a high minority neighborhood and splitting it into little sections. We're basically leaving one portion assigned to Aiken as it was. We didn't disturb that, but more emphasis on recruiting students in those areas to racially diverse schools. So that's the real challenge for us. Do we zone? Do we force choice? Or do we encourage parents to make good choices, wise choices? And I want to say that I have had a conversation with Representative Harold Love Jr. And Councilman Jerry Maynard, and Council Lady Moore has asked for another meeting and in the Carter Lawrence area, and we welcome that opportunity because we want to start talking about choices available to Carter Lawrence parents who are primarily African American parents, but good support from Representative Harold Love and Councilman Jerry Maynard at making these choices available.
And there's another question. I've heard from several parents who live in, I don't know if it's 4B or 4D, I think, right across the street from Carter Lawrence. And they are concerned that they want a neighborhood, they want a neighborhood school. They want to be involved. Of course, we know that the more opportunities our parents have to live close to their school, the more involved they are. When we have parental participation, it brings up the whole school. So is there any willingness to allow a zone for Carter Lawrence for people who live right in that neighborhood?
Well, so the area I believe that you're referencing is on the map labeled as Area 4D. 4D is currently zoned to Aiken and has been since the 2009 rezoning plan. This area has roughly 95 or so students in it, and it's for the most part 100% African or 100% minority and 100% free and reduced meal. Maybe not exactly 100, but very close. This area is being provided an additional choice through zoned option to also go to Julia Green. So now, besides just being zoned to Aiken, they'll have an additional choice. Families in this area already can take advantage of the magnet school choice to go to Carter Lawrence. Some do, and they will continue to be able to as the Carter Lawrence returns, more to a district-wide magnet school. However, this plan is intended to promote diversity at Carter Lawrence instead of reassigning or rezoning students into there, which would be a negative in the sense of a diversity argument, and that's the primary reason why we stuck with the pro-diversity there.
Thank you.
And you did say transportation was going to be provided.
Transportation, it's just like all the, there's about 4,500 students across the district that have zone choice through Metro Center, North Nashville, J.C. Napier Homes, and then around the Brick Church area. So it would be the same as all of the zoned options, the same outreach and communication, the 100% response, the same transportation, and the same choice at the point of the year when they move in.
And let me ask you a question, too. I'm sorry, Dr. Brennan, were you done?
That's it. Thank you.
Let me ask you a question. And this is regarding Carter Lawrence, because I was, along with Mr. North, I served on that student assignment task force that led to that approval by the board in 2010 of this new pupil assignment plan. So my question here is this. Carter Lawrence, during that process, we talked about how essential it was for the parents that live across the street from that school to have an availability for their children to go to Carter Lawrence. And Carter Lawrence has the potential to feed into Rose Park, that has the potential to feed into MLK. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So if you rezone Carter Lawrence to Waverly Belmont, then it takes that magnet tract out, correct? Because that feeds into more middle school. Waverly Belmont would then feed into more middle school, is that correct?
Waverly Belmont will feed into J2 Moore Middle School, that is correct.
Okay. So then my question is this. I know you talked about grandfathering, and I think I was trying to write down, but I missed something, because you talked about how the rising third and fourth graders will have an option to remain at Carter Lawrence. So what about grandfathering options? Because that's the part I missed.
Well, actually, the Carter Lawrence school zone, the current school zone at Carter Lawrence will remain as a zoned option for Carter Lawrence.
Okay.
So all of those families can remain at Carter Lawrence if they choose, or they can choose to go to Waverly Belmont, which will be their new zone school, or they have a third choice of also Julia Green.
Okay, but
so even future families moving in, that process will be a zoned option instead of an actual physical school zone for the school.
Okay, so and I just wanted to be clear on that, because I know that was a part of that assignment plan. And I've already started receiving calls from Carter Lawrence parents concerned about this, so I wanted to be very clear.
This plan does nothing to take any choices away from current Carter Lawrence school zone families.
Okay.
This plan only offers more choice. Well, I would say technically the one thing it takes off the table is the Glendale geographic priority zone.
Okay.
Which unfortunately, I don't believe, if there's one or two students in that area might possibly be choosing Glendale currently, but it's not operating at the level that we hoped it would have.
Okay.
That's the only thing that is removed. Otherwise, they have the same choices they previously did, and they in fact have more.
Okay. Now, the next question I have is related to Glendale. You said that it's going to become an 80-20 school.
Right.
So the 20% that would be open to countywide, what type of, and this is probably really premature, but have we started thinking about a marketing plan for that 20% countywide? How is that going to be filled? How are those seats going to be filled?
Well,
Because we're talking about increasing diversity.
We've definitely been talking about a marketing. We've talked about the need and the desire for a marketing plan, not only just at Glendale, but the importance of the marketing for the zone choice and the additional GPZ options in this area. I don't have a specific tangible plan to share with you today, but I know through internal conversations we recognize that that is an important need because the program at Glendale is such a popular and attractive program, and so we see the benefit of hopefully being able to market it to increase Hispanic participation through the Spanish immersion program as well.
I don't think you're going to have an issue at all filling that 20%. I was just kind of curious about if we'd started talking about that. So let me make sure I don't have any other questions. The Carter Lawrence, I think, was the biggest piece of it because, again, I'd already started receiving phone calls on that. So if I come up with something else, I'll get back to you. We'll go Ms. Shepard next.
Okay. Chris, This is a great presentation. I appreciate all the information. And Ryan, can you tell me approximately how many students in 9A would be affected?
Yeah, I say roughly 25, but I think it's exactly 28 to be precise.
And do we
And that's
know-
elementary age students. It drops to maybe 15 middle school students.
Yeah, I think Chris is right there.
Okay, so do we know, just ballpark, what the demographics of those students look like?
Yes, we do. 9A is very diverse. I've got the exact counts on that. One second. 9A is currently, this is referencing the 28 students at Granbury currently, 21% Asian, 29% African American, 21% Hispanic, and 29% white, and 29% free and reduced meals.
Okay, and could you give me the same information regarding 4B?
For 4B, I actually don't have both of them added together, but I'll take, they're roughly, actually, my notes have them split into two areas through our planning process, but I'll give you the rough percentages because they're roughly the same.
Okay.
Essentially, there's 3% Asian. One of the areas has 3% Asian, one of the areas has 0% Asian.
Okay.
The other area is 91% African American, 9% Hispanic. The corresponding area is 7% Hispanic, so it ranges from 88 to 91% African American. The white is either 0% in one area to 2% in the other, being one student. And it's 100% free and reduced meals in one area, and it's 95% free and reduced meals in the other area. So it's right in that 98%.
And about how many students are we speaking of?
It's a total of 160.
160. Thank you.
Mr. Pinkston?
Thank you. So again, I'm going to sound like a broken record tonight, but what we're doing here and what we're going to be asked to vote on in June is not policy governance. If we were a retail board of directors, we would not be setting franchise boundaries. So here we are in the weeds again, and I'm fine with it. I think the voters and the neighbors expect it, but let's not pretend that we are policy governance purists when we're talking about zone lines. Quick point of orientation, District 7, which I represent, the western edge, is the 12 South neighborhood, which I share with Mr. Hayes. Waverly Belmont building is in his district on 10th Avenue. You cross the street, you're in mine. And for the past 6 weeks, plus or minus, I have been, as I know he has been, inundated with calls and emails on this issue. It's been an eye-opening experience. For those of you who went through the county-wide rezoning, Dr. Brannon, I assume, and Mr. North and others, I cannot imagine the stress of dealing with it at that scale because this one's been pretty overwhelming. So I want to commend the work before I criticize it. First, I think Dr. Register, Mr. Weber, Mr. Latimer, and the rest of the team have done yeoman's labor trying to put together a plan that makes sense. However, I agree with Ms. Spearing on the issue of diversity or the lack thereof. We only get to do this once every few years, and we're missing an opportunity if we don't find a way to bring some balance to these schools that right now are very unbalanced and don't even come close to meeting the goals of the diversity plan, the much-touted diversity plan. My other criticism is the lack of front-end public engagement. I would submit that this conversation should have started months ago with all the different constituencies, Julia Green, Percy Priest, Carter Lawrence, Aiken, Waverly Belmont, the 12 South neighbors, to solicit their input on the front end, which is a lot different than getting their feedback on the back end, which is what's happened here. I think we're really lacking in communication. People make real estate decisions, which are basically investment decisions based on school zones, in the same way that Metro government sends letters and phone calls and does outreach when they change neighborhood zoning ordinances. I think we ought to be doing the same. Advanced, transparent communication is everything here, and we ought to do better, which is what I announced, referenced during the announcements period about public engagement. The other thing is, I think we need to extend our planning horizon. I know we're not going to solve that tonight, but right now we're just projecting out to fall 2017. But why are we not projecting out farther? Metro planning makes projections 10 years and 20 years out to manage growth for the city. I would argue that we need to be talking right now about managing future growth in the Hillsborough cluster. Additional elementary capacity is going to be needed sooner rather than later. Explosive elementary growth leads to explosive middle school growth quickly, and this is not just true for Hillsborough, but for South Nashville, Glen Cliff and Overton, Southeast Davidson County, Antioch and Cane Ridge. I don't know whether this is, Madam Chair, appropriate for a retreat or a work session, but rethinking our planning horizon so that we're doing a better job as an organization, thinking ahead about real estate, capital projects, and so forth. And then finally, I do think central office has its work cut out for it before you guys bring something back to us on June 10th. People are pretty upset right now, particularly in the 12 South neighborhood, and I think a lot of it boils down to that lack of communication. Maybe some of that can be solved on June 5th, but if we walk in here on June 10th and there's still a massive kind of revolt going on, which is essentially what's been happening over the last few weeks at different points in time, then I think we've got a decision point about whether or not to move forward at that point, but spend some more time doing the spade work that it takes to make this successful. Thank you.
Any other comments? Ms. Frogue?
I think most of my concerns have been raised, but just to echo a few of the points that were made, with this plan being created to address both diversity and overcrowding, these schools are really striking in their lack of diversity, and I know we're always trying to balance, serving a neighborhood, serving a geographic area, with also with serving a more diverse population, and that's always a huge challenge. But you've got Julia Green here, which will still only have 14% free reduced lunch, and then Percy Priest has 7%, and we've got, I think, 26 schools that are 90% plus free reduced lunch, and that's, like, if you want to call it a lever, all the research says that socioeconomics make the biggest, have the biggest impact on school performance. So I was wondering I know out in my area where we've got a more balanced population, we have we bus children in, I think, from North Nashville to Harpeth Valley. Have we thought of those kinds of things?
So that is the zoned option mechanism that you're referencing there, where Buena Vista has the zone choice to Harpeth Valley. I might get those two mixed up.
That's correct.
And then Robert Churchwell has the choice between Gower, and then John Early between, the middle schools too. So
essentially, though, that's a one-way busing plan. It's busing minority children out. And when you think about the challenges, and of course, we've adopted, and I recommended to you, a diversity plan that I think's cutting edge in the country. But what you have to understand is the limitations when you do that. I am not in favor of creating more busing plans, and particularly in areas where schools are full. You're not talking about one-way busing. You have to talk about two-way busing, in and out. And I think that's a real concern for this area. So when you look at Percy Priest and you look at the size of that school zone, and recognize the fact that that whole area is essentially racially isolated. It's primarily a white middle-class and upper-class community. There aren't many options for dealing with that. I think 9N is a good approach. We actually have received very positive feedback from the people in 9N. I think that's a good move. We are not recommending to make it bigger now, but I think that does keep that. I think we just have to recognize the fact that the diversity, and I think the diversity plan will show some improvement in some areas as we implement this. The Waverly Belmont School is a diverse school, the one that's recommended now, and I think the community will change, and I think the percentage of white population will go up at Waverly Belmont, not down, but it still will remain a plurality school, which is very good for us. But you have to look at the real challenges that we have and what are we willing to do and what are communities willing to do to have diversity in all schools. It's a bigger issue than the school system, and it's a bigger issue than school zoning. It's an issue of public housing. It's a community issue as a whole. It's how communities are organized. Our goal is to consider diversity every time we make a decision, and I take that very seriously. I think it's important. I think we need to embrace the diversity in our community, but there are limitations about what we can do when you look at the demographics of the Julia Green District, when you look at the demographics of the Percy Priest District and where people are moving. I think Waverly Belmont is a great opportunity for the people who live there, and I look forward to a meeting next week to talk to them about the planning that's going on and what we're going to do to support what potentially could be the best elementary school in the Hillsborough cluster very quickly.
And the one point, Dr. Register, for the most part, you mentioned it, but I just want to echo it and be clear about it. This plan, from the very beginning, we faced a significant challenge due to the geographic location of Waverly Belmont and due to the lack of diversity in the southern portion of the Hillsborough cluster. So just as Dr. Register mentioned, the demographic makeup of that area is just not very diverse at all. And the little bit of diversity at Julia Green and Percy Priest come from the 12 South Edge Hill area, which is the most logical boundary for Waverly Belmont. So when we established that boundary for Waverly Belmont, we realized that it would potentially have a negative impact, and we had to account for that. But we, there's limitations to that. And so while we would like to further promote diversity in those schools, it just isn't practical at this point in time.
I had a couple more questions, I'm sorry, but frankly, I'm not a big fan of busing children long distances either, but I think in a situation like this, I think this is an opportunity, as Will said. We are in a position now, we really have an opportunity to sculpt these schools so that we have more balance. And I love Waverly Belmont. I think that is we're looking at some good percentages there and some balance. And it's about where, my children go to a school that are at about 50% free reduced lunch, and it works very well. Okay, but and then the other issue, overcrowding, if we're talking about that, it's helping a little bit, but maybe, as Will said, maybe we need to project out further, but I could easily see the schools suddenly becoming overcrowded again.
Well, the initial proposal did do slightly more to alleviate overcrowding, but because of the offsets, once we rezoned students out, we didn't want to negatively impact the diversity at Julia Green and Percy Priest. So in that, we had to find a means to put diverse students back in those areas. And so through that kind of limited the amount of capacity we have to work with. So the initial plan, did help maybe by another 30 or 40 students at each school. However, what this plan does accomplish is the long-term growth trends around the 12 South and the northernmost border is where the most significant amount of growth is. So while this really isn't truly getting Julia Green and Percy Priest well below capacity, it's helping a little bit now and also shaving off the longer-term enrollment.
So let me make a point about the original plan and the modified plan. I am very comfortable with either approach, and we, of course, the original plan was the first recommendation that we developed. However, as we've reacted to and listened to community input, a lot of people are upset about that plan, and I think there's another approach. That's the proximity zone, and I can be very comfortable with that plan too. Beyond that, I have, as we've been working on this for a long time, and I don't see other viable options that are available now. And so, and as we receive input, I would welcome any recommendations that come that would be other viable options to deal with our problem. This is a very complex issue, and so I'd welcome any other options. But I think these are the two that we have now: the original proposal and then this final recommendation from us are two options that will work.
Can I ask, I'm sorry, maybe one or two more questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you say that these schools, first of all, you said Carter Lawrence, we've been hearing from these parents, that they will still have Carter Lawrence as a zoned choice.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? Do they have priority because they live in the geographic zone?
So the zoned option area is essentially, it's a lot like having multiple zone schools. It essentially is like having multiple zone schools. So when a family moves in, let's say they move in October, and they move in and they have a first grader and a third grader, when they show up to an enrollment center to enroll their children, they'll be informed that their zone school is Waverly Belmont. However, they have zoned options to go to either Carter Lawrence or Julia Green, and they'll be explained that they can pick from those three schools. If they pick whichever school they want, and they'll be placed there immediately in October when they move in. There's a large communication outreach that goes along with zoned options. Every year we mail families letters. So every year families that live in a zoned option areas are marketed, because once you choose a school, you can't switch in the middle of the year, but you could switch for the next school year. We don't want people just jumping back and forth between schools, but for the next school year they could choose to change schools, so we mail a letter there. When a new plan like this is implemented, we'll treat it just like the 2009 rezoning plan, where we stop at nothing to get a response, an informed response from every family in that area, so that we work very collaboratively with schools. Once children are settled, for the remaining district, that 100% response moves to transition grade levels. So we inform everybody, but we hone in on every fourth grader that has the choice to go to Harpeth Valley, and we don't stop till we get a response from every fourth grader every year to tell them that they can choose between Buena Vista or Harpeth Valley. So that continues, and this will be the same as that, except for during the implementation, we'll have 100% response for all families.
So how much capacity do Julia Green and Percy Priest have for choice students right now?
Well, the choice right now is currently today they're both overcrowded, so there would be no choice. In this plan, Percy Priest is actually receiving 9A as a rezoned area, so there is not zoned options for Percy Priest. But Julia Green does have a capacity for the zoned options, and we don't intend to shut that off. We don't intend to say, like at Harpeth Valley, sometimes we run into capacity concerns, but we're not going to turn Buena Vista families away. They're just like they're part of the zone community.
Okay, and then I have one last question, I'm done. So Carter Lawrence in the past was a magnet.
Mm-hmm.
How did that, first of all, how did that affect its performance, and how did it affect its diversity? Or do you have that from maybe something you can't tell me off the top of your head?
Well, I don't have the specific facts stuck in my head, and I don't know the academic achievement.
And he hasn't
From
slept in 2 weeks.
2002 to 2009.
But what we've noticed is that the public perception is that because of the zone school, that it's no longer a magnet theme. So what we've noticed is the demand for the school has slipped some over the years since the 2009 rezoning plan, and the diversity again has suffered a little bit as well. But Carter Lawrence was never a perfectly diverse school from the very beginning. However, we hope that because of the outstanding achievement there now, and as far as the pathway to Rose Park, that we can improve our district-wide marketing so that we can improve the district-wide applicant pool there.
Okay, and before I take it, I'll get to you in just a second. I wanted to comment on a couple of things that I've heard here. I think, Mr. Pinkston, you said something about getting into the weeds on this. Monitoring these plans is a part of what we do. The Student Assignment Task Force flipped into a diversity management task force for the purposes of monitoring. So it is part of policy governance to make sure that we monitor this. Also, I wanted to ask Mr. Weber, can we get these numbers for Carter Lawrence as well? Because I'd be really curious to see what the actual numbers or the projected numbers are going to be.
So are you looking at this sheet right here?
Yes.
Okay, this sheet was intended to show the current versus the two proposals. So the proposals are the same for Carter Lawrence. The Carter Lawrence demographic percentages are in the handout that you received, but they don't include the increase in diversity because we just simply didn't, we haven't put a number on the marketing and the impact there.
I'd love to see those numbers when you have a little bit more detail on them.
Okay.
I'd be curious how we perform, so we went through a magnet school grant
Get
application
out of my head,
process.
Mr. Hayes. That was my next question.
So
See, we're here.
When we asked for the grant from the federal government, we said we were going to do X, Y, and Z. And we talked about monitoring our contracts. We talked about having a contract compliance committee before.
Yeah.
To look at all of our contracts and all of our investments. I'd be curious, we applied for a grant, we said we were going to do X, Y, and Z. How have we done, be it through academic performance, be it through diversity, and does this change in any way? And then we need to-
Well, no, you're fine, because that was kind of my question, specifically related to Carter Lawrence, because prior to the rezoning, Carter Lawrence was one of the better performing magnet schools in our district. And I know you've said because it's now a zone school, the perception is that it's not still a quality school. I'd love to see what the trends have been in academic performance for that school since that plan went into place.
Some slippage in perception, but Carter Lawrence was not a part of the magnet school grant.
It was not a
No.
thematic, we didn't receive a thematic magnet. Do we have a grant application ever went out?
Not for Carter Lawrence.
So I'd be kind of curious to see what those numbers look like.
Okay.
Just as far as the academic progress has been over the last few years. So did you have any other questions? Go ahead. You're on. I'm done.
Now I'm really interested. Can we create a magnet without going through a federal government process?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Hume Fogg,
It's been there for a long
Martin
time.
Luther King.
Okay. I want to just quickly applaud the effort of your office in the last handful of weeks. You've had a lot of comments going through, particularly your emailing from the hospital. Thank you. You didn't have to do that. So thank you. You went above and beyond. And I know there's been a lot of comments that you guys have responded to, so I appreciate that greatly. I concur with a lot of the things that all my colleagues have said, particularly around strategy. Added, if we look at 2010 student population around 76,000, next year we're projected to be about 85,000 students, roughly another 2,000. I appreciate your effort last year to start the early budget conversation. At budget chair 2 years ago, I spoke to Mr. Henson about the notion of creating a 2-year look ahead, not just a 1 but a 2. The idea of discussing growth from a capital budget, from an operating budget standpoint, and being more vocal about it within the community is critical. I've said to a lot of my constituents, and this is 90% of these people, 85% of the people live in my district. We are becoming more like, frankly, other counties that may rezone on a year-by-year basis. If we look at the notion that we're going to add 1 million people in the next 25 years, we have a big growth conversation to have as a community. I applaud what Nashville Next is doing. I've had a lot of conversations with them around our capital budget. They have a slide that says we have $4 billion in unfunded infrastructure as a city. I encourage them to add the $1 billion in schools, and I think they've done that, because we have to figure out how we're going to grow. To a lot of my constituents who live in these neighborhoods, I've said to them, it's particularly those people who are between schools and I could, between zones, I could be mistaken in my assessment, but it's not necessarily a matter when. If you get rezoned, you will be rezoned at some point in time. I fully anticipate, if we look at the next 10 years, Hillsborough cluster will see another rezoning or two, unfortunately. And the same thing for many of your districts that are growing. I look at Ms. Kim's district and what's happening with the Casey Homes redevelopment. South MDHA folks last week and saw their ambitious plans to add 3,000 or 4,000 units in your district, all around Kirkpatrick and Ross, and it's really exciting. But it's also going to mean that we have to invest in more teachers, more schools, and have that conversation loudly, publicly, and often. Some of my very close friends are impacted by this rezoning. And I know that, they said to me, Michael, our challenge is that Percy Priest or View Green or Aiken, they're a given. It's a known commodity. We know what we're going to get, and the unknown is scary. I've said to them, and I truly mean this, that I believe, and it's not necessarily my duty to do so, it's my duty to believe in you as a director, and hope that, and have confidence you're going to hire good staff. I have a tremendous amount of faith and confidence in our human capital department. I don't know that it's my job necessarily to do so, but I do. And I'm really impressed with the reforms that you've made in that arena. And you touched on this earlier, that little piece of the conversation has been lost. I know we will hire a highly effective school leader who will have the ability to hire his or her own staff with a high level of autonomy. And I know that this school will quickly rise to be among the best in the district, because all of these reform efforts, right? A new school opening is the chance for us to show that. If we get it wrong, we have one person really to look at, unfortunately, who is our director. But we have been on this path, right, to reform 64, maybe 70, maybe 100. I don't know how many efforts are underway now, but we've had a lot. And I believe in the direction that we're going. And I really like this choice option. I think we will see a lot of folks in these 4N and what is it, 4L choosing to go to Waverly Belmont, because it will be an exceptional school. I've had a handful, not a ton, but a handful of parents really ask about going to Aiken, right, in 4L. And that's exciting. I've tried to delicately probe parents and families who live in that zone to see, are they excited about it? Same thing for 4L to go to Waverly Belmont. One parent said, well, can we have a bus so we can really choose? And I said, well, no, we probably can't do buses to Waverly Belmont and Percy Priest, but it's a 5-minute drive from your house if you can get across Woodmont. I think you guys have been incredibly responsive to doing your best to not split neighborhoods. And for Mr. Weber, who, I got in the car and I drove around, I appreciate that. It's also a little harder. And it seems that this plan begins to do a better job of that. So I want to say thank you for the hard work. I look forward to the next conversation. And I would like to put everybody in this community on notice that we really are growing as a city, and that's exciting and painful and difficult. And these conversations around rezoning will touch all of our districts sooner rather than later.
Thanks for your comments. And I think one thing to point out is that when we reassign fewer students, which is what 78 students fewer are being reassigned, that's what we're talking about here, then it does keep us closer to capacity at those schools. And so the promoting and marketing the choice options for parents becomes really important. And you're exactly right. Our enrollment projections for next year are up. We're projecting 2,000 additional students next year in the school system. Part of them charter, part of them non-charter. So it will continue to be an issue for us. And if we keep these numbers closer to capacity rather than emptying Julia Green and Percy Priest below capacity, then we may have to come back quicker. And then we would look at the possibility of 4N being reassigned to Aiken, or 4L being reassigned to Waverly Belmont, which will be a known quantity then. But I believe that when people see what we do, they're going to make choices that will promote our plan. I think we probably have some Waverly Belmont 12 South area residents here, and so here's what our plan will be going forward. We'll select a leader for Waverly Belmont in the fall, and given the complexity of this issue, I would plan to do that early, so that we have a year for a leader to engage the community, to get involved with the community, and to hire staff. And the commitment that we're making to Waverly Belmont School and to that leader is that leader will have the ability to choose the entire staff. There will be no people reassigned to Waverly Belmont. So that's a great opportunity. And having been many years ago a principal that had that opportunity, that's the way you create a great school from the very start. And I encourage people to think about the opportunity there and to use it. And I think given the challenges that we have in the Hillsborough cluster, I think this is a great option. I think it will help us over the next 5 years at least. I will respond and say that we do have a 10-year facility plan. It's updated every year, a capital plan. It is a capital plan that does not just include buildings. It includes a lot of planning and updates from this department, and we modify it, and we make modifications every year, and those come to the board. But I'll point out that Waverly Belmont is a modification to the 10-year facility plan. We have to be able to modify when demographics change differently than what we've expected, or if we have great pressure points. This solution for this area is really important now because we've got much greater pressures in other parts of the county that will have to be addressed before we can come back to this area.
Any other comments before we wrap this up? I would say one thing, I agree with you wholeheartedly, because as we sit here speaking, I know we've got at least 300 more people that have moved into the southeast Nashville area. Since the meeting started. So, yeah, we are continuing to grow. So, Mr. Weber, Ryan, thank you so much. This is a great presentation. We appreciate all your hard work, and congratulations on the new baby.
Thank you.
That's awesome. So, any other questions? All right, thank you, guys.
Madam Chair, item 2 of the director's report is a resolution that was proposed by the Council of Great City Schools. All of you have received this resolution, and it is a resolution on the Males of Color Pledge. You have a copy of it in your packet of information. This was time sensitive, and I talked to you about this as the Council of Great City Schools is soliciting support for this resolution from the participating school systems in the council. So I present it to you as information since you and I have agreed to do this, and we had no negative feedback from any board members.
And I will. I'm planning on bringing the formal resolution to our next business meeting in June. So, you, board members, you have this in your packet for review. If you have any questions, please reach out prior to that meeting. Committee reports. I'm sorry, Dr. Register, are you?
That's it.
That's it. All right. Committee reports. Budget and Finance. Mr. Pinkston.
Thank you. Of course, tonight we advanced our revised budget request, which we will now carry to the Metro Council next week on Wednesday, June 4th at 4:15 in the council chamber in the Metro Courthouse. That discussion, if I remember last year, took about an hour, hour and a half, and haven't heard anything new or differentiating from the conversations I've had with Chairman Stein and Chairman Glover, the budget chair and the education chair, respectively, in the council. So, again, reiterating, June 4th, 4:15 Central Time, Metro Council budget hearing with Metro Nashville Public Schools in the council chamber in the Metro Courthouse. that concludes my report.
Thank you. Teaching and Learning, Ms. Spearing.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Let's see. Okay. Here we go. The Teaching and Learning Committee met on April 29th, and we had 5 items on the agenda. The first one was teacher recruitment efforts. Excuse me. And it was reported that 6,400 applications had been received in the past 4 months. And of those, 186 were in the pipeline, as compared to only 54 the year before that. And recruitment ends the end of August. The committee was especially interested in our progress in relationship to recruitment efforts at Vanderbilt and Lipscomb. This year, 2013 to 2014, out of 636 new hires, 44 were from Vanderbilt and 40 were from Lipscomb. The top 10 institutions, top 10 rated institutions accounted for 49% of our hires, although that didn't include Belmont because they're not nationally rated or ranked. Certain positions are hard to fill, such as EL and math. And we also need more Latino positions, since 20% of our student population are Latinos. MNPS seeks more diversity to fill these positions. And we offer incentives such as step 4 or 5 on the salary scale. Some cities like Houston and Dallas offer relocation bonuses. Administration will continue to study recruiting incentives offered by other large urban districts and will continue to focus on recruiting the best and brightest. We heard from Amy Wyatt about the TEL survey, which correlates scores with academic student gains. 3 years of data indicated that MNPS scores were in the satisfactory range, and the favorability score increased in the spring of 2014. At the school level, survey results are used with principals who use the data to inform their school improvement process. And lead principals and executive principals help our administrators develop areas of significant need and determine areas of significant need and then support them in developing plans to improve those areas. The idea is for the principal to be analytic in their decision-making process. They look at trends as they study the data. We also looked at professional development updates. A professional learning advisory committee is being formed to include representatives from all central office departments. 4 teachers, 2 assistant principals, 2 principals, 2 lead coaches, and representatives from MNEA and SEIU will also be included in this committee, which will meet biannually, and they will plan and evaluate professional development. We will hear more about how our presenters use feedback from teachers to improve their sessions. In intersession, the attendance this year was 18,053, and it was a 3-year dip, but it was because there were only 4 days of intersession this year as compared to 5 in previous years. Days were used for college visits and trips to museums, projects, and plays. 90 schools participated, 81 offered remedial programs, and 81 offered enrichment programs. It seems there was a mistake with the robocall that confused parents, and the need for more transportation continues to be a vital need that actually inhibits our success. And half-day classes are also reportedly inconvenient for parents. Except for only minor changes, Executive Expectations EE12 hasn't been updated since 2003. So the policy that Lisa and I rewrote was presented. However, we ran out of time to discuss this, so we will meet again in June, and we don't know the next date yet, but we'll know as soon as we know. We'll get back with you on that. And I appreciate everyone that attended. We had very passionate discussion, and it was a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And that ends the committee reports. And one reminder, tomorrow night, 6 o'clock at Lakeview Elementary, there will be a meeting on the Antioch Cluster zoning changes. And this is due to the new elementary school that is slated to open on Smith Springs Road in the Antioch Cluster, coming up in 2015, 16, I think it is. I don't remember the dates. Okay, so any final comments? Great. Ms. Froh?
There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.